My son skipped his mother's funeral, and 2 days later, he called to ask about the will. He didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't apologize for missing the service. Just said, "Hey Dad, let me know when we can go over the estate stuff." I assume there's a will or something. That was it. No mention of the woman who gave birth to him. No acknowledgement that she died slowly, painfully, while he sent flowers from a delivery app and called it love. But the story didn't start with that phone call. It started the night before we buried her. "I don't see the point, Dad. It's just a funeral." That's what he said. Brian stood in my kitchen, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, texting someone while he told me he wouldn't be attending his own mother's funeral. He didn't yell. He didn't make excuses. He didn't cry. He just shrugged. "I've got meetings next week." And I said goodbye already. It's not like it changes anything whether I'm sitting in a pew or not. He took a sip of coffee. "You understand, right?" I said nothing. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because if I had opened my mouth right then, I might have said something I'd never be able to take back. So I nodded, slowly, quietly, and Brian left. The next day, I buried my wife. I stood alone in the front row. No son beside me. Just empty space and a folded program where he should have been. People looked around. I could feel the glances. Nobody asked where he was. They didn't have to. Some cried for Laura. Others cried because they knew what it meant to raise someone for 29 years and have them not show up to your funeral. When I gave the eulogy, I didn't mention him. Not by name. Not even vaguely. Because I wasn't sure he was still my son anymore. The day Laura died, she'd only asked me one thing. "Promise me you'll keep his heart soft." I made that promise with tears in my eyes. But sitting in that pew, surrounded by the echoes of her absence, I realized something brutal. I couldn't keep a heart soft that was already stone. Brian wasn't always like this. I'm not going to pretend he was perfect, but he used to care. When he was little, he'd climb up next to Laura in bed and ask for bedtime stories she made up. Not Disney, not books, just her stories. She'd call him my little rocket scientist because he built Lego towers with triple support beams by age 6. By high school, he pulled away a bit, normal stuff. But the real shift happened after college. Yale changed him. Or maybe it just gave him permission to become who he was already leaning toward. Efficient, cold, focused. His word for it was optimized. Mine was gone. We saw less of him each year. Texts replaced visits. His girlfriend at the time, Emily, barely looked up from her phone the one time they visited for Christmas. When Laura tried to connect with her, she offered to show her how to use an app so she wouldn't have to shop in person anymore. Laura just smiled. She always smiled. But this was different. Skipping the funeral? Calling 2 days later to talk about the will? That was a choice, not a phase, not youthful detachment. It was a line in the sand, and he stepped over it with both feet. "I assume everything goes to you first, right?" he said on the phone, casual like we were ordering pizza. "Then we split it when you're gone. That's how these things usually work." I stayed quiet. "Dad, I heard you," I said. "You'll get what's coming." I meant it, but not in the way he expected. That night, I poured a glass of whiskey and sat in Laura's reading chair. Her blanket was still folded neatly over the armrest. A scent of lavender still lingered. She used to fall asleep with a book in her lap, glasses slipping down her nose, pages creased softly like she thought she'd pick it up again in 5 minutes. But now she never would. Brian knew that. And still, he chose himself. Something in me hardened. He thinks he's getting everything she left behind. He has no idea what's coming. I didn't tell him I was angry. Didn't scream. Didn't lecture. I told him I'd let him know when things were sorted out legally. He thanked me. I thanked him too. Then I sat down at my desk, pulled out the folder marked Family Estate Planning, and opened a drawer that hadn't been touched in 3 years. Inside was a sealed envelope Laura had written the month after her diagnosis. It was addressed to me, and only me. I read it slowly twice. By the time I finished, I wasn't crying. I wasn't even sad. I was ready. The day after the funeral, I called our lawyer. "James," I said, "I need to make a few changes." He hesitated. "I thought everything was finalized last year." It was. But Laura didn't know everything back then. There was a pause. "You want to exclude him?" I didn't answer the question directly. I just said, "I want to make sure that when the time comes, Brian sees exactly what his mother thought of him. And what I did too. I don't believe in karma. I believe in deliberate consequences. And my son had made his choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. When he got engaged, I didn't call to congratulate him. I raised a glass to the woman he'd never see again. Not Laura, of course. She was already gone. I meant the one whose name I read for the first time beneath a ring photo on Instagram, tagged between half a dozen hollow hashtags like hashtag she said yes and hashtag grateful heart. Her name was Madison. Bleach-white teeth, manicured to the edge of sterile, and a smile that reminded me of laminated menus. The ring sparkled so bright I almost laughed. Brian hadn't just found a fiancée, he'd found a stage prop, and she was perfect for the role. The caption said, "Forever starts now." The top comment said, "Your mom would be so proud." I stared at that one for a long time. That was the same week I started pulling names off the contact list Laura and I had maintained for years. Neighbors, extended family, old friends from our church days. Anyone who still thought they'd be hearing from Doug and Laura around the holidays. I didn't just delete them. I revised the whole list. I took people off intentionally. I was pruning, creating space. Nobody noticed. That's the thing about grief. People give you so much room to disappear, they never realize you're not planning to come back. A few days later, Brian left me a voicemail. His voice was even, maybe a little tight in the middle, probably rehearsed, like the messages he left clients after a soft no. He said, "Hey, Dad, I was just thinking about Mom a lot this week. With the wedding coming up, it's made me really miss her, you know? I know we didn't always show it the same way, but I did love her. Anyway, I'd love to talk sometime about how you're doing. And also, I'm not trying to be pushy, but if there's anything I should know regarding the estate, the will, or anything else that might affect the future, just keep me in the loop." He paused, then added, "I know you've probably made updates. I mean, obviously, that's your right. Just hoping there's no surprises." That last word hung like smoke in the air. I saved the message, and then I mailed him something. Not a letter, not a threat, just a copy of the original will. The one we drafted back when Brian was in high school, back when he still sat at our table and made Laura laugh so hard she'd snort into her tea. The version where everything would have gone to him, no questions asked. I didn't include a note. I didn't include a date. I just sent it to his work address, return label blank. 3 days passed. No call, no email. Then, late one night, another voicemail. Shorter this time. "Hey, just got something in the mail. Wanted to confirm. Is that the most current version? Let me know if I should be aware of any other arrangements." I didn't respond. That was the first test. By March, the people around him had started treating him like the golden son. He was invited to speak on a family legacy panel, some overpriced leadership conference in Atlanta. A clip of it hit LinkedIn by the end of the week. In it, he sat in a tailored suit, legs crossed, eyes soft with just enough grief to earn sympathy without making the room uncomfortable. At one point, he said, "When I lost my mother last year, it reshaped everything. You realize fast what really matters: family, purpose, impact." The audience nodded. He went on, "It's why I'm so intentional about building something meaningful now. I want my future kids to know they come from strength." I watched that segment twice, then saved the clip to a private drive. That was the moment I realized he'd turned her death into a marketing asset. I needed a walk after that. The kind of walk where you pass your own mailbox 3 times without realizing it. I walked past the school Laura used to volunteer at, past the bakery where she ordered the same cinnamon scone every Thursday, past the trailhead where we used to take Brian when he was still small enough to ride on my shoulders. That night, I sat in the garage and opened the safe. Inside was the envelope, not the will, that had already been handled through the trust attorney, but the other one. The one labeled with his name, in Laura's handwriting, and the words, "Do not open until I'm gone." She'd written it a month after her diagnosis. Sealed it. Gave it to me without ceremony. Said, if he shows up for the funeral, give it to him that day. If he doesn't, hold on to it. I hadn't read it. That was our deal. But holding it now, I felt the weight differently. I put it in the fireproof box with the real documents. That was the second breadcrumb. In April, I received a dinner invitation from Nancy and Paul Finley, friends of ours for almost 30 years. Good people. Too polite to ever ask direct questions, but smart enough to notice things when they weren't right. They invited me over for pork tenderloin and small talk, and somewhere between the salad and the wine, Nancy said, we saw Brian's engagement photos. Beautiful couple. Have you met her yet? I shook my head. Not yet. Haven't been invited to anything. Paul cut in. I imagine that must sting, with Laura gone and all. The wedding. I mean, it's the kind of event she'd have lived for. I nodded slowly, choosing my words. She would have helped pick the flowers. She was always good at those little touches that make things real. There was a silence. Then Nancy said, he posted something last week that kind of struck me. Said the wedding would be a tribute to the people who raised us right. I just thought. Her voice trailed off. I took a sip of wine. Brian's very good at public statements. He always knows how to hit the right note, even if the melody is hollow. That was all I said. But from the way Paul looked at me, I knew it landed. Let them start wondering. That same week, I quietly moved the contents of the storage unit to another facility. The new unit was leased under a completely different LLC, a holding company Laura and I had used years ago for a small investment in her friend's organic candle business. I still had the paperwork, still had the EIN. No one would think to look there. I paid the rental a year in advance and stored the keys in my bank lockbox. All of her real heirlooms, her mother's brooch, the wedding ring she stopped wearing when the chemo started, the journals, the pie recipe, went into a temperature-stabilized archive case. I labeled it plainly. Private property, not for distribution. That was the third move. Not symbolic anymore. Operational. May arrived. The weather turned. Brian sent a mass email announcing the wedding date, August 17th. The subject line said, "Save the date for the big day." I saved the email, but not for scheduling reasons. The same week, I received a call from my attorney, James. He said, Brian's been poking around. Nothing direct, just questions. Wanted to know how long the trust could remain undisclosed. I asked him, did you answer? Only what's legally required. Nothing more. I thanked him. And then I asked for one small amendment. Something Laura would have approved of. The final week of spring, I stood in the driveway with an envelope in hand. Not the letter, not the will. Just a blank card with Laura's handwriting photocopied from one of her recipe notes. It said, some ingredients are earned, not inherited. I mailed it without a return address. No signature, no context, but he'd recognized the handwriting. That was the last breadcrumb before things would start to shift. He thought I was gone. Just an old man dissolving into memory, waiting to hand over what remained. He didn't realize I had already chosen the moment he would fall. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm, exacting, surgical. The pedestal was tall enough now. All I had to do was wait for the crash. Brian once told me that image was everything. Those were his exact words. Not talent, not integrity, image. The packaging, the optics, the version of you that people applaud from a distance. I wonder what he sees now when he looks in the mirror. The first call came from Carol. I hadn't spoken to her since the memorial. She sounded hesitant, like she was trying to decide whether she was about to gossip or confess. She told me she'd received a strange message from Brian. Apparently, he'd reached out in a panic after Madison's bridal brunch. One of the bridesmaids had asked about a goodbye letter Laura supposedly wrote him before she passed. She called it touching. Said she'd heard about it from someone who knows the family. Brian hadn't even blinked. Played along. Said it meant the world to him. But after the brunch, he was rattled enough to start calling anyone who might have known something. Carol told him she'd never seen or heard of any such letter. Then she asked me, there isn't a letter, is there? I said there is. He just hasn't earned it yet. That rumor wasn't an accident, but it wasn't mine either. I never told anyone about the letter Laura wrote. But I had told Carol once, offhandedly, about the piano lessons Laura gave to a girl named Ellie, daughter of a man who now happened to sit on a real estate board Brian was lobbying. Small world, grief. It has a way of forming quiet alliances when you're not looking for them. 2 weeks later, the deal Brian had been pushing fell apart. There was no press release, just a line in the city business paper. Pending zoning approval withdrawn due to change in board alignment. I read it twice. Then I smiled. I hadn't sent a single email, but I knew who had pulled the cord. I also knew who they loved more, Laura or Brian. It wasn't close. From that point, the fog around him started to thicken. A string of speaking engagements, 2 universities, 1 nonprofit, and a high-profile fintech conference, either canceled or postponed indefinitely. One of them included a quiet line in the cancellation notice. In light of recent concerns about transparency, we are reassessing this year's lineup. Brian never addressed it publicly, but someone leaked the email to a blog that covers social impact brands. They ran a headline: "The man behind the mic. Can you lead a legacy you didn't intend to bury?" I didn't write it, but I knew the editor. Her mother went through chemo 2 beds down from Laura. Brian tried to weather it. You could see it in his posture, the slight overcorrection in public photos, the sharper smile, the way Madison suddenly became the only one allowed to post. He was falling into image rehab mode, doubling down. But what he didn't understand, what people like him never understand, is that once people begin to question the packaging, they start wondering what's in the box. The account at Legacy Lies surfaced a few days after the 3rd cancellation. It didn't just target him. It asked questions, clinical ones, stripped of emotion, but loaded with implication. What does skipping your mother's funeral teach your future children? Is public grief still branding if it skips the burial? When the cameras go off, who do we answer to? Each tweet had barely a few hundred likes, but the replies started to fill with people asking, "Is this about that guy Brian? And wasn't he just dropped from a speaker panel?" One tweet embedded a screenshot from his engagement announcement. It circled the comment, "Your mom would be so proud," and asked, simply, "Would she?" I didn't retweet it, but I didn't ask anyone to stop. Then came the wedding website update. Madison's sister, who had been listed as the maid of honor, was suddenly missing from the lineup. I wouldn't have noticed on my own, but someone screenshotted the before and after versions and emailed them to me anonymously with the subject line, "Guess someone's asking questions." No body text, no signature. That same afternoon, Brian's firm issued a quiet press statement about internal realignments within the Social Equity Foundation leadership. The language was vague, but I knew what it meant. An audit had been requested, not publicly, not with noise, but someone had asked where every dollar in that fund had gone. That someone sat on the same board Laura once advised, before Brian ever learned how to spell philanthropy. The unraveling wasn't loud. That's what made it effective. It wasn't a scandal. It was erosion. And erosion, done right, always looks like bad luck until the structure gives way. He called me a week later. No voicemail this time. I picked up after the first ring. His voice was tired, flat. "We need to talk." I agreed. He asked if we could meet in person. I told him I'd choose the place. I picked a small restaurant just outside the city, the kind of place where the waitstaff knew not to hover, and the lighting was soft enough that nothing felt confrontational. I arrived early and took the booth in the back. When he walked in, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Not disheveled. He was still wearing a blazer and dress shoes, but thinner, paler, like he was clenching his jaw in his sleep. He didn't bother with small talk. He sat down and slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts, emails, screenshots of tweets, copies of the original will in various envelopes, even a photo of the storage unit key with my name attached. "Is this you?" he asked. I looked through the papers slowly. Then I closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. "I didn't write the tweets," I said, "but I know who did, and I didn't ask them to stop." He swallowed. "Why?" I picked up my water. "Because you skipped her funeral." His voice cracked. "That's it." "No," I said. "That's just when the clock started ticking." He looked like he wanted to shout, but didn't know where to start. "She was your mother." "I know that." "No, Brian. You don't." He took a deep breath and reached into his coat pocket. From it, he pulled out a small envelope, the one I'd mailed months ago. The one that said, in Laura's handwriting, "Some ingredients are earned, not inherited." He set it on the table like a landmine. "She wrote this, didn't she?" I nodded. "Do I get to read the real letter?" I leaned forward. "Not yet." Silence. He broke it with, "I'm trying to fix this." "No, you're trying to contain it. That's different." He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since he was a boy, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of punishment, but fear of being seen. I stood up and reached into my coat. I placed a sealed envelope on the table. It was Laura's letter. Unopened. Untouched. "Read it when the wedding is over," I said. "Not before." He stared at it like it burned. Then I placed two $20 bills beside it, nodded to the waitress, and left him there, seated, silent, and finally aware he wasn't the author of his own story anymore. By the time I drove home, another email had hit his inbox. Not from me, from a law firm. They were asking for clarification on a small charitable gift Laura had once pledged, one that required moral representation. That was the language she insisted on using. Moral representation. He wouldn't qualify anymore, and I hadn't even pulled that string. He thinks this is the fallout. He hasn't seen the earthquake yet. While they danced under string lights and toasted themselves with artisan cocktails, I was walking the street where Laura taught third grade for 27 years. The same block where the kids used to wave at her like she was royalty in a passing motorcade. I didn't need to see Brian's wedding. I already knew what was waiting for him when they got back. By that moment, while he was twirling his bride for the camera, three things had already happened. The first was a message sent directly to Madison's father. Not by me, but I had coffee with the man who sent it. A financial advisor. Laura once helped his daughter pass her SATs after 3 failed attempts. He owed her a favor. The letter was neat, professional, and unforgiving. It raised quiet questions about Brian's nonprofit spending, travel labeled as outreach, donor funds used for partnership meetings at luxury restaurants. It wasn't a bomb, it was a scalpel, and it didn't accuse. It simply said, "Should you wish to discuss these details before your daughter's wedding, I'm available." The second was even quieter. The vineyard had a clause in their fine print, buried deep in the legal weeds, that prohibited events from promoting any organization under audit. It had never been enforced before, but a trustee, one of Laura's former coworkers, knew the clause existed. 2 days before the wedding, Brian's foundation got its audit letter. The venue allowed the wedding, but every vendor on site was briefed. Be courteous, be compliant, and do not endorse his brand. But the third move, that was the one that mattered. When Brian and Madison returned to their apartment, sunburnt from the coast and giddy with post-ceremony glow, there was a package waiting at their door. No postage, no label, just a cream envelope with his full name in cursive. Inside were 2 things, a copy of Laura's final will and a handwritten letter she had signed 9 days before she passed. He read it in silence. I know this because the doorman told me. Brian stood in the lobby and read the entire thing before he even stepped onto the elevator. Didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared at that paper like it had punched a hole in his chest. Laura's handwriting hadn't changed, even when her hands had gone weak. She'd written it slowly, over 2 days, with a pen she'd insisted I bring from home. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't cruel. But it was final. Legacy isn't what you build. It's what you refuse to walk away from. I didn't want to write this. I wanted to believe you'd show up. Not for me. For who you used to be. But if this letter ever finds you, then I guess I was wrong. You can still earn it. But not from me. Mom. He didn't post it online. Not yet. That came later. But from that moment on, everything around him began to fracture. Louder, sharper, and faster. A week after the honeymoon, the real estate firm quietly froze his proposal. No press release. No calls returned. Madison's father stopped replying to his emails entirely. A source sent me a message. Internal trust concerns. They're pulling out. That was all it said. The week after that, the university Brian had been scheduled to guest lecture at replaced his spot on the syllabus with a speaker on ethics in impact investing. His name was removed without comment. His assistant quit the next day. Then the wedding photographer pulled his quote from their homepage. Then the videographer canceled their highlight reel. Then someone leaked the audit letter. By the time his foundation's board scheduled an emergency meeting, At Legacy Lies had posted its most damning thread yet, a side-by-side breakdown of his public grief timeline against the audit spending trail. It ended with a quote from Laura's public teaching profile. "The way you honor someone's life is by showing up." And then came the post. Brian uploaded a photo of Laura's letter. Not a screenshot. The real thing, creased at the edges, slightly smudged in the corner from where he'd held it too long. No caption. No comments allowed. It stayed up for 6 hours. Then it was gone. His Instagram disappeared the same night. 3 days later, Madison moved out. A neighbor told me she left with one suitcase and the dog. She didn't slam the door. Didn't cry. Didn't look back. I never reached out to her. I didn't need to. The foundation dissolved shortly after. The board cited ongoing restructuring concerns. The remaining balance was quietly distributed to Laura's school's endowment fund. Carol sent me a photo of the principal holding the check, standing beside a new bookshelf labeled, "The Laura Whitmore Memorial Literacy Grant." It sits just below a plaque that says, "For those who never stopped showing up." I didn't attend the unveiling. I didn't need to. Brian tried to reach out again 2 weeks after Madison filed for separation. This time it was a text. "I wish I could go back." That was all it said. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the storage unit. I hadn't been back since the day I packed her recipe box away. I opened the container, took out the box, and ran my fingers over the lid. Inside, the card was still there. Her handwriting as clear as ever. Some ingredients are earned, not inherited. I closed the box and walked it straight to the school. Gave it to the principal. Told her to teach the kids what real legacy tastes like. A few days later, I got a letter from the nonprofit board's attorney. It wasn't addressed to me, exactly. It was a copy of a final report. Just a line highlighted in yellow. No misuse determined. However, future funding is contingent on formal apology and full attendance at required legacy events. I smiled. Legacy events. They meant the things he skipped. The things that mattered. The things you don't get back. The last time I heard Brian's name spoken out loud was at a small alumni gathering Laura used to attend. Someone asked how her son was doing. I said he was finding his way. They nodded. Didn't ask more. I could have said a lot. I didn't. He skipped her funeral. I made sure it was the last thing he ever skipped without consequence.